This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 147. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and I'm the CEO of Building Automation Monthly, and you are listening to the Building Automation Monthly Podcast, where every week we discuss a topic related to building automation. In today's topic, we are going to be discussing how to build and manage a building automation system project. Now, this is actually a really convenience, not the right word, a coincidental topic because I've had several of our students reach out to us about project management. Either they've taken a role in project management or they've experienced bad project management. And we're also starting to work on the beta of our building automation system project management course, or our BAS project management course. So it's kind of just a coincidental timing that all of this coincided right when we were going to be doing this podcast episode. So imagine this, right? You're a technician or you're a quasi-project manager, and the salesperson visits you in the building or comes out to the job site and just plops a job in your lap, gives you a couple documents and says, "Hey, I'm going golfing, have fun." And you're like, okay. That's the reality of what most folks are facing in the field. Even the large organizations that have sales to operations turnover processes, I'll be completely honest, unless the project is more than $1 million, it usually does not get done. Maybe the salesperson will take you out to lunch or something and hand off the project to you. After all, you probably helped them estimate the project. But the reality is that most of the time, it just kind of shows up on your job tracker board or whatever software you use, and you're left just trying to figure out, how do I do this thing? So here are 7 steps that I've found to build a building automation project from scratch. And you may be wondering, why do I say build a project? Why do I say that? Because here's the deal. Project management is one thing. I think it definitely is something that happens out in the construction world. However, when we're talking about building auto management or building automation, I was going to say auto management. When we're talking about building automation, unless you're on multi-million-dollar projects, the reality is you are most likely also going to be doing the project as well as managing the project. So I like the term build much better than I like the term manage. But you know what? If you're hung up on that for whatever reason, just whenever you hear me say build, replace that with manage and we'll all be good. So in this episode, we're going to learn that building automation project management, or building, as I like to say, is just a set of repeatable steps. And once you've learned this, it can be repeated again and again and again and again and again. So step 1, we need to conduct a turnover. Now, I'll be real with you. A lot of times, especially if you have a high-performing salesperson, you're going to have trouble getting that person to sit down with you and actually perform a turnover. Now, there are some really good salespeople out there who realize the value of performing turnovers. For those of you who are in sales and are listening to this, turnovers are extremely important. They make sure that the project gets executed. And if this project is part of a strategic plan, like we discussed in the previous episode, and there's a capital plan, and getting this project executed correctly is going to lead to much more work down the road, it's in your best interest to conduct a turnover. But how do we do that? So the first thing we need to do is we need to identify the cost. So there's really 5 kind of mini steps inside of conducting a turnover. And I will tell you that out of all of the steps in the project management framework, or in the building a project framework. See, I can't even say that. I like the term building a project, but I just go back to project management. It's so ingrained in my brain. All right, whatever. That's just me thinking out loud. So as you're performing this step, conducting a turnover, there's a lot of sub-steps. The first sub-step is to identify the costs. You need to understand. Now, typically, and we teach this in our scoping and estimating course, costs break out into 3 buckets. You have one bucket, which is your material. That's typically 1/3 of the cost of a project. You have another bucket, that's your subcontractor. That's as well typically 1/3. These are just general rules of thumb. And then we have our third bucket, which is MTC, or manager, technical, and clerical labor. And we need to identify our costs associated with each of these buckets. That way we can maintain our cost structure, because when we have slippage, which is the actual executed cost of a project, is either more or less than the estimated cost, that is a bad thing. Now, what we need to realize is there's 2 types of slippage, right? There's negative slippage, where you actually lose money on the job. It costs more to do the job than you actually estimated. And then there's positive slippage, where you actually make money on the job. Positive slippage actually, and this is a little segue here, can be a bad thing. If you're noticing 10% margin on every job, that means someone is really padding jobs, and you're potentially losing jobs because you're overestimating the cost. You're being too expensive. So that's why it's really important to identify and manage our costs. We then move into timeline. We need to know what needs to be done and what needs to be done when and in what order. Oftentimes we'll read the specification, which we'll talk about in just a second, and that will talk about what kind of submittals we need, when we need them, what the approval process is, etc., when material orders, when there's billing, etc. Then we need to get our documents. We need to get the latest construction documents, both specifications and mechanical plans, and any existing documents if this is a retrofit. Then from there, we move on to commitments, both written commitments and verbal commitments. The worst thing in the world is to walk in and find out that the salesperson negotiated that you were going to carry the costs of the BACnet interface card. And so no one's ordered it, and it comes crunch time, and no one can connect to the chiller because you were supposed to order the card, but it wasn't documented. It was kind of a, golf course deal, and no one knows, and it's just bad news all around. So we need to understand our commitments. And finally, we need to understand our subcontractors and any long wait materials. We need to make sure we get our subcontractors booked. This is where some project managers will play games where they'll have a subcontractor and then they get incentivized by beating down that subcontractor, so they'll get 3 more bids, and then they'll try. I really don't recommend that strategy. In the short term, you will make profit doing that. That's the reality. In the long term, you will burn out relationships. Subcontractors will not want to estimate your jobs, or they will estimate high knowing that they're going to be beaten down. It's just a bad all-around strategy. And you also want to handle any long wait materials. Anything that has a long lead time, this is where you want to start going. But you got to be careful that you understand the commitments around submittals and the timeline around submittals, so that you don't order materials only to have your submittal rejected. And then you see in kind of the catch-22 here. So you gotta, this is why this is the most important step, because it's an art form at this point where you start to learn, all right, well, they're most likely not going to reject a supervisory device, so I can go order that because that has a long wait, etc., etc. So that brings us to step number 2, which is reviewing the specs and the plans. Now, as I mentioned, it is extremely important for us to have the right documents. So that's a given. Whenever you hear me referencing specifications and plans, it should be in your freaking mind, hey, I'm working off the latest documents. If you don't know how to know if you're working off the latest documents, then go through our BAS Startup and Checkout course, where we go through how to make sure you're working through the latest documents, as well as how to then execute the work. So reviewing the specs and plans, we want to identify our submittal requirements. That's kind of mini step 1. And then once we've done that, once we've identified our submittal requirements, we want to then create our submittal. Wow, what a surprise. We want to create our bill of materials and get that approved as quick as possible. That way we can get our materials ordered. Why do we want to get our materials ordered so fast? Why do you think that is so incredibly important to get some materials ordered? It all has to do about cash flow. So the trick with project management, and for those of you who are subcontractors, you're probably not going to like to hear this, but the reality is you want to try to work off of other people's money as much as possible, because you got to realize the mechanical contractor who's paying you and the general contractor who's paying the mechanical, depending on how your contracts are structured, they are working off of your money, meaning that you're going to go and order materials and they may not pay you for 60 days. That means for 2 months, you're not getting payment on money you've already spent. So if you can go and order materials and your contract allows you to bill for those materials while they're in storage, that's another really important kind of tip. This is going to be jam-packed with tips, by the way, because I've managed thousands of projects over the years, or either directly or indirectly through project managers that were under me. And I will tell you, you're going to want to listen to this again, because there's going to be so many little tips like that one right there. A lot of folks don't think about, okay, I'm going to order the material, but can I bill for material that's in storage, or does it have to be on site? If it does have to be on site, is it sufficient if I just put a job locker on site and then I put the material in there and then I can bill for it? These are all things you need to understand. They can be addressed either through contract document review or through RFIs and RFCs. So it's really important that we go and understand this. Now you got your bill of materials, and we've got our sequences, which we're going to review next. We really want to understand our sequences. We want to understand if they are looking at doing something completely asinine, which is not going to work, and we want to address that as early as possible. So for example, I remember I was doing a school, and it was a all-wood music studio, and they had these fan coil units, and with these fan coil units, their idea was they were going to have chilled water fan coil units. Okay, that's cool. But then how are you going to reheat this air? Because fan coil units pulling outside air, how are we going to reheat the air once it's subcooled to remove humidity? Well, their idea of doing that was that they were going to pull 100% outdoor air in the southern United States, which is very humid, and mix that with the cold air, and somehow magically through the miracle of wishing and hoping, that would dehumidify the air. Anyone with a basic fundamental understanding of psychrometrics knows that that is not possible in this universe. So since that wasn't possible, I had to go and point that out and be like, hey guys, this isn't going to work. And then they're like, well, you're not professional engineers, so what do you know? You're just a controls guy. I'm like, well, I do understand that when you dehumidify, you usually have to heat stuff up. And you kind of don't want to be reintroducing humidity when you're heating stuff up. And they're like, oh, no, we're not going to do that. All right, well, I mean, 6 months later, they were putting in electric duct heat because they didn't want to do it at the time. But hey, whatever. I got it documented through an RFI and RFC. And so my butt was covered. That's all that matters. This is what's going on during this phase. I live in a land of reality, which as much as I would love to help people help themselves, the reality is a lot of times all you can do is just document, cover your butt, and, you know, hey, if they want to take your advice, great. If not, well, that's fine too. And then you got to look for gotchas, things that could burn you. Things like, hey, if you don't hit the certificate of occupancy, there are liquidated damages, which means that for every day you're holding up the project, you could be paying a lot of money, which, depending on where you're building buildings, could be very, very expensive. Now, from here, we want to actually create our design. So this is step 3. We're going to create our control submittal, and we're going to submit any critical RFIs. I mean, this is pretty straightforward at this point. You create your control submittal. Please, please, for the love of whatever you believe in, go and make sure that you read the specification requirements for submittals. I swear, if any of my guys back when I was managing my team got submittals rejected for going and not reading the spec, and they like blatantly didn't read it, it's like, hey, you need to submit your product catalog sheets with your submittal. And then they didn't do it. And then the submittal got rejected and we got delayed 2 weeks. Yeah, they got their butts chewed out for that, and that went on their review, because that's just a stupid, lazy mistake. Don't be doing stuff like that. Look through your specs, read up, look through the mechanical plans too, read up on that. Surprise, surprise. Sometimes your submittal requirements are in your mechanical plans. I know it's shocking, but make sure you I'm a little sarcastic this morning because Saturday, our flight got canceled because Chicago O'Hare, the entire airport got shut down. And then Sunday, I had to drive to northern Florida to fly out. And that was just incredibly painful. And finally got out sitting in the back of the plane. And I'm super duper tired. So if I'm a little more snarky than normal, yeah, I apologize, but I don't apologize. So with that being said, you create your control submittal, you submit your critical RFIs. So you go and make sure that any requests for information that are critical to the success of the project have been submitted. Then we move on to step number 4. We line out our team. This is where we have an internal meeting with our techs, designers, programmers, and subs. We make sure we answer any questions. We ensure we have spec alignment. We make sure we have dates. We know. So this is something that I'm going to briefly segue into because it's just mind-boggling. But I'm surprised how many folks I talk to who are technicians who do not know how much time they have on a project or when their due date is. The reality is, and I've learned this time and time again, is that the amount of time it takes to complete a task will fill whatever time has been allotted. So if I give you 40 hours, the average person will tend to take 40 hours, even if it's a 20-hour task. It's a weird thing of human dynamics that I've seen happen time and time and time again. So with that being said, knowing this, you need to make sure that you understand how long certain tasks take, and then you need to make sure that you go and let people know how much time they have to do these tasks. After you've made sure that everyone knows how much time they have, you once again make sure we have spec alignment, make sure everyone knows what they're going to do, and then any orders that need to be placed are placed. Typically, they're placed by the clerical or admin staff. You really should not have expensive, high-dollar technicians or programmers placing orders for materials. Next, we move on to step 5, which is to execute the project. This is probably the most important step because if we don't execute, then we can't bill, we can't complete. No, I'm just being a little sarcastic here. The execute the project step, while being very important, is not the most important. The most important, once again, is to make sure we conduct our turnover, followed by reviewing the specs and plans. If we don't do either of those, then we will execute the wrong project. It's incredibly important for us to make sure we're on top of that. Now, the actual step of executing a project is pretty straightforward, and we cover this a lot in our other courses. So the installers will do installation, the designers will do the design, and the programmers will program. Typically, the order is that designers will design, the installers will install, the programmers will program, the installers will then download the program, and then the designers may do some front-end work. That is typically how things tend to work out. Now, once we've completed the execution step, we need to validate our install, which is step number 6. Now, validating our install is as simple as performing 2 steps. We need to perform our peer-to-peer and checkout, our point-to-point and checkout, rather. And we need to support our commissioning and our test and balance processes. Now, if it seems like I'm starting to rush through things here at these last steps, it's because as far as project management goes, if you have properly done a turnover, if you've reviewed your documents, if you've created your design and you've lined out your team, the execution, validation, and closeout steps should be seamless. They should be fairly flawless because properly documented, properly submitted, properly turned over projects tend to be executed very well. The reality is the tasks to execute a project are the same tasks whether the project goes poorly or the project goes well. The only difference is the documentation for the installers and the processes and expectations placed upon the technicians, programmers, and designers that are performing the project. Now, I know that seems like a bold statement, and a lot of folks like to excuse skipping these first three steps: the turnover, the review specs and plans, and the creation of the design, and they like to blame it on their technical team. Oh, if I just had so-and-so, they would be able to execute so well, da-da-da-da-da. That's why the project's not going well, because my programmer's not as good as that programmer. The reality is, in the majority of the cases I have seen, this is not only completely false, but it's really just a way of excusing poor project management, poor project control in the beginning part of the project. The reality is, if you go and perform those tasks, and yes, I am repeating myself because it is this important, of conducting a turnover, reviewing the documents, creating your design, and lining out your team, if you do all of those things, you will have a cash flowing project that will be executed in most cases on time and within the budget. So as I mentioned, steps number 1, conducting the turnover. Steps number 2, reviewing the specs and plans. Step number 3, creating our design. Step number 4, lining out our team. Step number 5, executing the project. And step number 6, validating our install. And then finally, we have step number 7, which is closing out the project. It's surprising to me how many folks get so close to project closeout, then they improperly perform project closeout, and they don't get paid the full project, or they leave a bad taste in the customer's mouth. It's really ridiculous that you go through an entire project, everything goes great, and then you decide to just pull off and go do another job, and the last experience with a customer is a bad one. You know, I am someone who studies relationships as far as relationships with people, meaning how do you relate with people. As an owner of a business, understanding how to relate with people and understanding how to go and have interactions with customers and potential customers that are positive is incredibly important. And the one thing that I see consistently is your last interaction is the one that folks remember. Yet, whenever we seem to do projects, we pull folks off and send them to another project at the very end of the project. So it doesn't matter if we did great for the entire project. All they remember is that the final couple terminations of wires weren't done, training wasn't properly done, O&Ms are incomplete. And because of all this, their overall remembering or overall memory of the project is poor. The project was poorly performed in their eyes, even though you may have done an excellent job. So this is a really important tip for you to remember just in human interactions. Your last interaction with someone, despite how positive your interactions were before, is what they're going to remember. Now, sometimes they will give you the benefit of the doubt if you've got a history doing a lot of projects with them, and all of a sudden this one just happens to end like on the week of Christmas and you're having trouble managing it because you just had a cold snap and everyone's out on service calls. They may be forgiving of that, but if you have no history with someone, this is what they will interpret as their expectations of your performance. That's why it's really important when you are going to close out your project that this is where it's game time. This is a Super Bowl. You go and you finalize your red lines and your as-built. You close out the training, you give them the O&Ms, and you support them during the warranty phase. If you do that, and you do that well, you will get repeat business. This is what people talk about. This is what they think about. Folks will forgive, hey, the backnet card didn't show up on time as long as the project is closed out properly. So let's recap on this because this is something incredibly important that I don't see anyone talking about anywhere, is project management and how to build a BAS project from the ground up. As I mentioned, building and managing a building automation project is simply a set of repeatable steps that once learned can be repeated again and again. We begin by conducting a turnover. We identify our costs, timeline, documents, commitments, and subcontractors and long wait materials. From here, we move into reviewing the specs and plans, focusing in on our submittal requirements, excuse me, making sure we have a bill of materials, making sure we understand our sequences, and addressing any gotchas through the RFI, RFC process. From there, we move on to creating our design, making sure that our control submittals are submitted according to our specification, and submitting any more critical RFIs. We line out our team based on an internal team meeting with our techs, designers, programmers, and subs, answer any questions, ensure spec alignment and dates, and place any material orders. Then, and I'm going to go really quick here, we move through project execution, install validation, and finally project closeout. If you perform these 7 steps, then you will be rock solid on building automation project management. So with that being said, as I mentioned, the beta for our building automation project management course is going to be coming out in the next month. So if you want to enroll in the betas, this is the opportunity for you to enroll in our courses as they're created. You get a discount and we get feedback as the course is being built. Then I really encourage you to be on our email list or our Facebook group and pay attention for when that rolls out. They always sell out and they are always limited as far as how many people can join. So make sure it's going to be first come, first serve. I know we already have about 12 folks standing by for this when the beta opens up. With that being said, thanks so much. Make sure you go to buildingautomationmonthly.com/147. Join in the discussion, ask your questions around project management. Would love to hear from you there. Thanks a ton, and I'll talk to you again next week. Take care.